Back in July, I made a video where I redesigned some of my OCs from my magical, wondrous high school days. I say magical and wondrous very loosely here since my writing and characterization and really just my entire creative process at the time was questionable at best and horrifying at worst. To be fair, I was still a kid that didn't know any better, but looking back at it more than a decade later, the whole thing feels like having an undercooked chicken served to you at dinner. Salmonella. The characters I redesigned for that video were the main characters of a project that was, at one point, very special to me. In fact, there was a time when that project consumed all of my brain cells, and I spent at least 6 years working on that story before I finally realized that I would have to move to greener pastures, if you will. However, in recent years, and after watching several OC redesign videos from other folks on YouTube, the gears in my head started to turn again. What would this childhood project that I used to love working on look like if I had thought it up and wrote it today? Before I continue though, let's do a refresher or brief recap for anyone who's new here. Although I still highly recommend checking out the first video in the series to avoid any confusion. But anyway, when I was in middle school and high school, I had an action/urban fantasy/magical girl story called 26. It was heavily derived from, and in some cases straight up copied from, the stories and other things that I enjoyed. Multiple aspects of the story were lifted from Bleach, which I was a big fan of in high school, and many parts of the script for the first 15 chapters were play-by-play ripoffs of the 2003 live-action adaptation of Sailor Moon. Which also happened to be my introduction to the franchise, even though I never finished that show. Oops! As the years went by, the story became more complex, to the point where I was biting off more than I can chew without even realizing it. What started out as a story of 8 high school girls fighting monsters and other beings from different worlds and also traveling through the multiverse to save life as they knew it became an overly convoluted story covering the rise and fall of a supposedly good organization that was dedicated to fighting these otherworldly beings. Add to that the fact that the original 26 was supposed to be 10 seasons long, and yeah. And there was one other thing with the original story that I wanted to address. Because I was a hardcore weeb child, the entire main cast was either half or fully Japanese, and the story was set in a fictional city in northern Japan. Going into the remake, I wanted to diversify the cast and have the story be set in Rome in the near future, having all of the main characters be from different backgrounds. Also, while the magical girl genre was a major aspect of 26, I don't think magical girl would best describe the new version since one of the main characters has a different gender identity from their old iteration. There were 8 main characters in the old version of 26, and the same applies for the remake as well. In the first video, I redesigned and talked about the main character Teresa, as well as Elea, a new recruit for the organization of element-wielding knights, and in the old version, Teresa's best friend, Shika, the hand-to-hand combat specialist of the group, and Idalia, the group's designated tactician who used to be Teresa's sister in the old version. In this video, I'll be covering the other 4 characters that I didn't get the chance to talk about, and as with the first 4 characters, I'll be giving them complete overhauls of their designs and their backstories, or lack thereof, and also completely new names. So if you're new here and want to see me take another crack at salvaging some very old OCs from the abyss, then make sure to like and subscribe. And if you're already subscribed, then welcome back to the spaghetti layer. Either way, strap your butts in because here we go! Again! So leaving off from Idalia, the 4th member of the group, we're going to continue down the joining the team order, if you will. This is Celestina Catalin Gabuat, formerly known by several names including Mila Yugure, Misaki Yugure, and Mila Terumi. Like I said in the first video, I had my characters switch names quite often. And in fact, the character I'm drawing right after Celestina is another prime example of that. In keeping with the tradition of having the main characters' new names be related in some way to either their power or personality, whether that's their given name or their family name, Celestina's first name means heavenly or from the sky. Which I think is pretty fitting for someone whose element is lightning. Celestina was the 5th seat of the 26 squadron, which meant that Teresa, the main character, was her captain. And she also ranked lower than Elea, Shika, and Idalia. I did state in the first video that the original script has been lost to time, which was probably for the best, but thinking on it now, I'm almost positive everyone in the main cast gained their powers through a typical Monster of the Day battle, and Celestina gained her powers sometime after Idalia gained hers. Prior to the hard reboot I did for the story in 2012, I don't think I ever gave Celestina a proper backstory, but she was at some point related to 2 of the other main characters. Minor spoilers, they won't be related anymore in the remake. Even though I gave Teresa, Elea, and Idalia proper backstories in the old version, giving the other 5 main characters backstories wasn't something that 14-year-old me considered a priority. That changed in the aforementioned reboot, however, when I finally had the brain cells to give Celestina and the others something resembling a backstory. In that version, Celestina was a middle-ranking member of what became the Order of 26, and she also happened to be a mentor at the Order's Academy, which trained new recruits for 1 year prior to them joining the Order itself. Looking back now, I'm not sure how the senior officers would have allowed a middle-ranking member to teach at the Academy, but they probably would have let her teach by merit of her intelligence, combat knowledge, and experience. Emphasis on probably. In the old version, Celestina's personality was much like Elia's, and it said as much in the PowerPoint I made for the series at the beginning of 2012, just prior to the reboot. She was cheerful, kind, and wanted everyone to get along. After the reboot, Celestina's personality changed a bit. She still kept that cheerful demeanor, but she had strange tendencies that would sometimes be off-putting to her peers, and she had a penchant for doing things that often came off as impulsive and dangerous. On the other hand, though, she had a strong sense of character and was willing to help her fellow members of the Order. Why does that sound like such a massive contradiction? Anyway, play the clip. Nice going, 14-year-old me. For the remake, I want to keep that strong sense of character for Celestina, and I also want to keep that cheerful aspect of her personality. She's a practical and charismatic person who always remains positive, even in the face of danger and even when things seem bleak. And her willingness to lead her teammates through any trial and tribulation, combined with her hard and diligent work, is how she eventually got promoted to Knight Captain. However, Celestina isn't from the Italy branch like Teresa and the others from the first video. She's a Knight Captain in the French division of the Knights of the Elder, that being the former Order of 26. She's originally from the Philippines, but moved to France several years before the beginning of the story. And it was there that she joined the Knights and worked her way up in the rankings. Around the time that the story begins, she and her division are sent to Rome to investigate a case that directly concerns the organization. And this is how she meets Teresa and the rest of the group. As Celestina is still a warm and friendly person, I imagine that she would get along well with the rest of the main cast, and it would take a lot to set her off. But she's also the kind of person who will put her foot down if she deems it necessary, or if someone decides to butt heads with her just for the sake of doing so. Because Celestina is also a practical person, I think she would want to work with everyone on finding solutions to problems that seem difficult at first. Maybe it's for this reason that she'd get along particularly well with Adalia, because she likes to be 2 steps ahead of everything. And maybe they could regularly put their brain cells together to solve any problems that have befallen themselves or their teammates. And maybe this could also lead her to get along with someone that I'll be talking about later on. One more note that I want to make about Celestina's backstory is that some of the new elements of her background also relate to her power and her new design. Resonance/dissonance is something that the user would be attuned to at birth, which meant Celestina was already attuned to resonance as a child. However, she didn't know that at all until, through unfortunate circumstances and really just a stroke of sheer bad luck, she got struck by lightning. In fact, her being attuned to resonance is the primary reason as to why she survived in the first place. Celestina received what I guess you could call a permanent magic buff as a result, but along with her magic being more powerful than the rest of the main cast, it's also more volatile. But before I talk about how this event relates to her new design, let's first talk about Celestina's old design. Her old design consisted of a form-fitting undershirt under an overcoat with puffy sleeves on top, sometimes with a ribbon at the front. She also wore a hat and a skirt that extended below the knees. And she had short black hair and dark green eyes. Celestina's design changed several times after that. In the early phases of the 2012 reboot, her design didn't change that much, but by 2013, her design had changed completely. She wore a shirt and a short skirt under a knee-length blue and gold coat, knee-length boots, and a golden headband with wings on either side. In the first video, I said that I wanted to keep the outfit designs from the 2011 version of 26. So that meant a largely dark green and black uniform with a third color that reflected the person's element. While most of the main cast's outfits are changing completely from their old version, I wanted to keep the vibe of Celestina's original outfit in some way, since I thought that outfit suited her better than the one she got in the first reboot. I kept her hat and added some bows to it, and I changed the pattern of her skirt so that it's shorter in the front and longer in the back. I also wanted her signature color, which is green, to be more prominent in her new outfit. So her skirt, the bows on her hat, and the underside of her tailcoat are all green now. You'll also see splashes of green in her hair and her pupils. And for the aesthetic, I made the underside of her tailcoat sparkly. In the original version of the story, everyone in the main cast had the same body type and the same face shape and whatnot, and I want to change that for the remake. Even if I still need to work on that. So you may have noticed that Celestina has a rounder appearance like Elia does. Because she was struck by lightning, Celestina has Lichtenberg figures which can appear on the body if a person has been struck by lightning, going down the left side of her face, her neck, her left arm, and partway down her back. But most of them are obscured by her outfit. I also put triangular motifs on her outfit since lightning has a sort of angular appearance, and I think it's a nice juxtaposition to her otherwise round appearance. You'll also notice that she has some sort of protective armor for her left arm, which is her dominant arm. It's not metal like what Teresa, Elea, and Chica have, but it's meant to protect Celestina from any nasty surprises that may come with having lightning as her element. As another refresher, I want to point out that in the old version, the cast's weapons were known as buki, which was the product of me typing weapon into Google Translate. If you look really close, you can tell it wasn't a very far cry from Bleach's Zanpakuto. You know, just to further enhance the big rip-off energy the original 26 had. Celestina's buki was a staff called Inazuma, which Google Translate gave me when I typed in lightning. I could have sworn that I gave her a spell book instead, but I didn't find any sketches of Celestina with one. But it did work out in the end since her staff looks vaguely like a lightning rod, and with her being a lightning wielder, it was almost too perfect for her. I kept some aspects of the staff's original design, like the ribbon that goes around it, as well as its color. Well, the drawing you should be seeing on the screen right now isn't colored in, but I knew going into this that it was supposed to be black. Aside from that, however, I completely overhauled the design of the staff. While Celestina would primarily conduct her magic with her staff, I can also see her firing off lightning directly from her fingertips if she needs to get close to an enemy. Like the rest of the cast, Celestina can mold her elemental energy and her element to her will most of the time, but because of the nature of lightning, and because her resonance tends to be volatile, it would probably be pretty difficult for her to use her lightning in a defensive manner or to use it as a shield. And even if she can, the results could be disastrous if she's not careful. I don't know, strengths and drawbacks for different kinds of power are always interesting to think up, even if I still need to iron out a lot of things since the remake is very early in the development stages. But I'll just leave it off there because it's now time to move on to one of Celestina's teammates. In the first video, when I talked about Teresa, I mentioned that in the old version of 26, there were 2 sword users on the team. Teresa and someone else. People of YouTube, it's time to talk about the other sword user. The 6th member of the group, or the former 6th seat of the 26th Division, is Aliénor Dupuis, formerly known as Ayame Haruki, Alicia Haruki, and prior to 2012, Mashiro Yoake. Unlike the rest of the main cast, Aliénor's real-world history as a character is more complicated purely by way of the fact that you could call Mashiro and Ayame, her predecessors, 2 completely separate characters. Mashiro came first, but she didn't make it to the 2012 reboot. Not really, anyway. A small part of her was carried over to her spiritual successor Ayame, but the only parts of Mashiro that were carried over were her element and the fact that she used a melee weapon. Everything else about her got a complete overhaul because I thought that Ayame was more interesting to work with. I think Mashiro's biggest shortcoming was that she was a little too much like Chica, something that 14-year-old me recognized and knew she had to fix. And in fact, I'm still very fond of Aliénor's post-2012 concept, so that was what I worked with for this redesign. Aliénor's new given name is the French form of the name Eleanor, and her new surname translates to from the well, which is, I guess, more of a straightforward reflection of the fact that her element is water. In the original version of 26, Aliénor was from a city not far from where the story took place, and she was one of the younger and lower-ranking members of the Order of 26. She didn't let her low rank bother her, however, and firmly believed that as long as you could protect everyone to the best of your abilities, it didn't matter whether you were a capable fighter or not. Even though Aliénor was picked on by the higher-ranking members, she still had a smile on her face and an intimidating sort of fighting spirit. While I want to keep some of her old personality, mainly her desire to protect the people around her, I imagine that Aliénor would be someone who doesn't recognize her own strengths. She's a generous and level-headed person with a strong sense of justice, but is often hesitant to get some of the harder work done if she believes that she isn't up to the task. Aliénor is also from the French branch of the Knights, born and raised in France, and is from the same division as Celestina, and she travels with the rest of her division to Rome. Like Idalia, Aliénor is also from a long line of knights, and she is also very fond of poetry, to the point where she might sometimes quote lines from poems every now and then. And on occasion, she can also be found writing her own poetry. Since Teresa is also a lover of the written word, I feel like these two would absolutely bond over writing, even though Teresa is more fond of novels than she is of poetry. Because Aliénor sometimes gets in her own head regarding her work capabilities, she might have a harder time helping out her teammates if things go south. But I think that as the story progresses, and after a few words of encouragement from her division and Teresa's team, she might realize that getting out of that mindset is necessary if she needs to get the job done, and it's because of that she gains more confidence by the end of the story. In the early versions of 26, Aliénor had long blonde hair tied into 2 twin tails with matching black bows, a black undershirt under a dark green coat, trousers, and I think black boots. After 2012, she had short brown hair, silver eyes, and she looked a lot like Sayaka from Madoka Magica. When I said I didn't have an original bone in my body at the time, I meant it. I do, however, have another drawing of her from 2013 where I was playing around with the idea of a time skip, and what the characters' designs would look like then. And that was actually the same time skip concept that ultimately lent its influence to Elea's current design. For that concept, Alienor got her twin tails back, and I also gave her a sleeveless shirt, a cape, a ruffled skirt, thigh-length stockings, and short boots. As for her current design, I borrowed heavily from her 2012 design while striving to make this new design as original as possible. Although, come to think of it, maybe I shouldn't shade younger me's design choices for Alienor so much because the next character I'm going to talk about was a far more egregious example. Oh boy, I can't wait to talk about that. Just kidding, I'm dreading talking about that. Oh god. For Alienor's new design, I gave her a collared shirt under a dark green blazer, a black skirt, and thigh-length boots with armor for both of her lower legs with blue and silver accents to go with the rest of her outfit. She also has silver pauldrons with a wave-like design that you can also see on her jacket sleeves. And you may have also noticed that the collar of her jacket is asymmetrical with a blue crystal dangling from the left side. Additionally, her gloves have blue gradients towards the fingertips, and she has wrist guards that disappear under the cuffs of her jacket. I gave Alienor's cape a vaguely wave-like shape, which is why it's sort of ripped up at the bottom, but I imagine it would take the appearance of an actual ocean wave when she's using her magic. Just another silly character design thing. I will say though, rendering the cape/wave was a bit of a challenge for me as I was drawing this piece. It's not that the shape of the wave itself was difficult, but actually rendering it took more time than I feel like it should have. I'm very happy with the result, but I do not know why I do this to myself. Apart from the outfit, Alienor's physical appearance didn't change too much. But I did give her hair more volume along with some lighter highlights and a blue gradient towards the bottom. As I mentioned earlier, her eyes were silver in the old version, but for her new design I made them a bright blue. Alienor's original weapon was a claymore named Mizu Hanabi, which meant water fireworks according to Google Translate. Don't ask, I'm pretty sure I just typed things I thought sounded cool into Google Translate for most of the main cast's weapons. In the 2012 reboot, however, her weapon took the form of a cutlass. For the new version, I'm changing things up a bit and giving Alienor a rapier. I feel like swords and sword-adjacent weapons just suit her, and I also think she'd be the designated swordplay expert in the main cast. I'm sure there was at least one scene in the original script where I wrote Alienor using her elemental magic, but as I said in the first video, there wasn't really any rhyme or reason to their powers other than spamming icicles everywhere, for instance. In the remake, as with everyone else, Alienor's elemental abilities are a little more versatile. Again, nothing is final, but as of right now, Alienor can do anything and everything related to water. She can manipulate any water molecules in the air, create giant waves or other things if she's near a water source, summon familiars made of water to her side, and she can also change the pressure of the water she uses in her attacks. So any water projectiles she fires could be anything from a splash meant to distract her opponent to something far more destructive. I've also entertained the idea of her being able to breathe underwater through the filtration of resonance energy in the water around her. Or at least something to that effect. And because she can manipulate water pressure, she can also swim to insane depths without having to worry about being turned into a pancake. While this would make her a valuable asset to have in certain missions, it could also spell disaster if her supply of energy was cut off while she was still underwater. Because Teresa's element is air, she could probably lend a helping hand in that scenario. But this next character could also be a major help in potentially dangerous missions. Now, another thing that I mentioned in the first video is that while some characters changed a lot for their redesigns, others didn't change too much. This next character is the former, and in fact she's probably in the top 3 for the characters who changed the most. Kaisa Rask, formerly known as Kari Yugure and Yuzu Sumeragi, was the 7th seat of the 26th Division. Her new given name is a Swedish diminutive of the name Katarina, which is itself a form of the name Catherine, while her last name can translate to quick, energetic, and healthy in both Swedish and Danish. At least according to the website behindthename.com. The name reference I chose for Kaisa can be a reference to her personality, but if you translate her last name as quick, it can also be a more subtle reference to her element as well. As her old family name may imply, Kaisa was at one point siblings with Celestina, but I don't remember if I made her older or younger than Celestina. This changed pretty quickly, however, as her family name had changed by the time I made the PowerPoint. Kaisa gained her powers after Alienor joined the team, and she proved to be a loose cannon with a major rebellious streak from the moment she was introduced in the story. She was very impulsive, every other sentence that came out of her mouth was dripping with sass, and she had a tendency to fight every monster and villain that had the misfortune of getting in her way. While I wrote Kaisa down in the PowerPoint as a nice person, on the condition that you didn't mess with her, that didn't quite translate to the script itself. At least not from what I remember. So I guess in a fit of irony, she was never shown as a nice person. She also didn't have much of a backstory like most of the main characters, but in her case specifically, it got sort of covered up by the fact that she would refuse to tell anyone about her past. However, I do remember briefly exploring her character arc in a short story I wrote where she was trying to work on herself and her own reckless tendencies. Kaisa is actually one of the characters whose background I'm not fully settled on just yet, but what I do know is that she's originally from Sweden but was transferred to the French branch of the Knights at her own request. Largely because she felt like she'd be a better fit elsewhere, and also because she wanted to explore the rest of the world. The transfer is also how she ended up in Celestina's division, and Celestina sees Kaisa as a versatile and therefore very valuable member of the team, even though she appreciates all of her teammates equally. Because Kaisa doesn't like to stay in the same place for too long, she also tends to get actively involved in missions, other unusual happenings, and also the investigation that brings Celestina's team to Rome. However, because she is still a pretty impulsive person, she will tend to act on her own regardless of how dangerous the mission is. But I also think her fearlessness would be crucial in sticky situations. And also, not gonna lie, I think it'd be pretty funny if she's watching everyone sit around wondering what to do next, and then out of nowhere she says, "No one's doing the thing? Okay, fine. I will," and then just rushes headlong into battle, much to everybody's shock and horror. Apart from her impulsive and stubborn tendencies, Kaisa is also a resilient, bold, and very loyal person who cares about her friends and her teammates. But since she prefers to let her actions do the talking, you probably won't hear her admit it verbally. Aside from Teresa, Kaisa was probably my favorite of the main cast because she just felt so fun to write, in spite of her very rip-off-ish nature, which I'll get to in a moment. There's just something about writing a nonconformist, stubborn, I'll do what I want, screw the rules kind of character that I really enjoy. And now we're getting to the part that I've been dreading. Let's talk about the absolute dumpster fire that was Kaisa's old design. In the old version, she wore a large puffy hat, a sleeveless shirt under a short-sleeved jacket, black gloves, a knee-length skirt, and boots that extended above the knees. She also had golden eyes and long brown hair tied into a single braid with tufts on her head that resembled cat ears. While it looks unassuming, Kaisa's old design was lifted straight off of Vita from the Magical Girl Lyrical Nanoha franchise, or more specifically the show's third season, Strikers, which I watched around the time I started high school. And it still remains the only season of the show I watched. Don't bully me please, I have no idea why I didn't start with the first season. Even though I thought I wasn't copying the homework too much, and even though I changed some things around for Kaisa like the hairstyle, the signature color, and some parts of her outfit, the influences were still glaringly obvious to anyone who knew what to look for. I even gave Kaisa a hammer for her weapon. Guess who also wields a hammer? Her design for the first reboot was a slight improvement, but it was still knee-deep in plagiarism territory. I remember wanting to take this series to print at some point, but I'm really glad that I didn't, because even though I was a kid at the time, there was a very good chance I would have landed in hot water. Because Kaisa's old design was a straight copy from another character, not so different from Alienor, I gave her a complete overhaul and a new concept going into this redesign. Maybe I shouldn't say new because I kept her element and her signature color, but hopefully you get what I mean. For her new design, Kaisa has long and messy platinum blonde hair with purple streaks tied into two low twin tails at the back and purple eyes. Though you'll also see that she has orange pupils and smaller orange streaks in her hair to complement the purple in her design. And I also had her hair be a little more wavy at the bottom to make things more interesting. While she still has the skirt, the long boots, and the puffy sleeves from her old design, the general vibe is also completely different. Her skirt now has little metal buttons at the ends with a lighter green kirtle-like garment with dark purple trim and short puffy sleeves that goes over it. Kaisa also wears a black corset with several long belt/strap-like thingies that go over the skirt and also trail at the back, purple arm warmers that fade to black towards the top, and black gloves. Kaisa's buki, a giant double-sided hammer, was called Yorunohiko, which was the product of me typing Night Flight into Google Translate. At least at the time. Again, because I want to flavor blast the new version of Kaisa and make her way more original than she was before, I chose to switch out her hammer for something else. While I was cooking up the concepts for this video, I debated giving her a flail/whip-like weapon like what the next character I'm going to draw used to have. Then I considered giving her a giant battle axe and then a pair of pistol swords. But then it hit me that almost everyone else in the main cast uses melee weapons as of right now, which meant I needed a ranged weapon specialist on the team. The pistol swords weren't quite the direction I wanted to go in for Kaisa, so I got a little creative. For a time, edged weapons with built-in pistols were common in Eastern Europe. The axe pistol, or the gun axe, was a Polish cavalry weapon from the 16th to the 18th centuries, though it was also used by the Swedish Navy from the 18th century until 1840. As cool as weapons like these looked, they had their disadvantages. Pistol swords specifically were not widely used because of their expense and poor performance. Instead of getting 2 weapons in one, you would usually get a heavy pistol and a heavy sword that was usually off balance, which meant it wasn't exactly ideal in combat. I want to work out the logistics of Kaisa's weapon so that it's usable and well balanced, but I still need to get to the drawing board for that. The current vision that I have for Kaisa's weapon, or rather weapons, is that there are 2 axes connected at the bottom by a chain, and both of those axes have built-in pistols. The axes are easy to wield and balanced enough so that Kaisa could use them as throwing axes. They can be detached from the chain, but I think that Kaisa would normally want to use them as some type of flail when she throws the axes. Maybe flail isn't quite the right word for what I have in mind, but I'm not sure if I can think of any other word at the moment. Something that hasn't changed between the old Kaisa and the new one is her element, which is time. Then again, only 2 characters had their element changed for the remake. While the rest of the main cast uses their element to directly aid them in combat, Kaisa's use of her magic is a little more unorthodox in comparison. Instead, she uses it primarily to get a few extra hits in during a fight. She can stop time for up to 8 minutes, and she can go up to 20 minutes back in time. Something that she would have attained after many years of honing her abilities. I think that when she started out with night training, she could only stop and reverse time for a few seconds. However, for all of her training, there's one thing that she can't do. Because of the many possible paths of fate that can exist at any given moment, Kaisa cannot go forward in time. She's probably tried once or twice knowing her stubbornness, but to no avail. Regardless of what she does with time, however, the only one who would be unaffected by the change in time would be Kaisa herself. It wouldn't just allow her to gain the upper hand, but I think her ability to reverse time could get her out of sticky situations, provided she doesn't get caught off guard first. That would be bad. That would be very bad. But let's now move on to the last redesign for this video and the last member of the main cast. So, in the first video, I floated the idea of Teresa being a new member of the Knights with no combat experience going in, as opposed to her being the destined leader of her team like she was in the original version. That meant that the position of captain would be left vacant, but after mulling it over for a bit, I decided to give the title of Knight Captain to this woman, aside from Celestina, who I also made a Knight Captain. She was in the old version of 26, the 8th seat of the 26th Division, so you could argue that she got a massive promotion for the remake. This is Hyunjung Moon, although if we were to go in Eastern name order, her name would be Moon Hyunjung. Her original name was Reika Yugure, and if that name sounds familiar, she used to be the older sister of Celestina and, for a time, Kaisa. Her given name can translate to virtuous, worthy, or loyal, but if you were to make a stretch and find a way to tie her name back to her element, the second character of her given name can mean courtyard. Hyunjung was an upperclassman in high school who always strived to do her best with everything she did. Even though she ranked the lowest of the 8 main characters, she still took her job and just about everything else very seriously, to the point where she straight up butted heads with Teresa over her leadership skills in the 2nd season of the original script when a mission to destroy a monster went awry. Where Celestina was a bright and cheerful person, Hyunjung came off as colder and more reserved. And where Celestina wore her heart on her sleeve, Hyunjung was more withdrawn and mostly kept her emotions to herself, but she didn't hesitate to share her opinions on certain things. But despite being the last person to join the team, which meant she had the least amount of combat experience, she proved to be a pretty competent fighter with an innate talent for fighting some bad guys. I mentioned in the first video that there were 2 characters who didn't make it to the 2012 reboot. One of them was Shika, the other one was Hyunjung. A large part of the reason why I cut the main cast from 8 to 6 was because I wasn't sure about how these 2 would fit in the vision I had for the story at the time, and because there was a part of me that acknowledged that I had too many main characters on my plate. They're both back for the remake now though, so as I said in Shika's section, I can't say I've learned my lesson. In the remake, Hyunjung is originally from South Korea, but found her way to Italy sometime after turning 18. She was already in the Knights when she moved, but it was when she was already in Rome that her strong work ethic and dedication were recognized. And by the time the story begins, she has recently been promoted to Knight Captain, and it's her division that Teresa joins after the completion of her training. Her introverted nature and drive to do her best hasn't changed from the old version, but I want to tone down the clashing with other people for something out of their control, strict perfectionist aspect of her old personality, because that has connotations that I don't like, and it's honestly kind of... yikes. While Hyunjung would be more patient with the rest of her division in the remake, she also tends to be harder on herself if something goes wrong, which really isn't helped by the many self-doubts that she has. Even though her family, friends, and the people around her are all very supportive of her, she still feels a lot of guilt, and despite her drive to prove that she's worthy of the high rank she's just been given, she often feels like she isn't doing enough in the eyes of the Knight Commander or herself because of the high self-standards that she sets. Even though, again, the Knight Commander is very supportive and an overall nice person. Because I feel like this was worth mentioning, and because this also ties into the connotations I was talking about a few moments ago, I wanted to briefly bring up the trope/stereotype of East Asians in particular being seen as highly intelligent or studious, and excelling in or getting perfect marks in things like academic subjects, along with the model minority stereotype that East Asians, among other groups, tend to get shoehorned into. As I said in the first video, negative stereotypes are something I actively try to avoid, and the same applies here. But I also thought it would be worth mentioning that as someone who also has Asian ancestry and who often tends to fall into the hardcore perfectionist mindset, the experience I have with setting high self-standards and feeling like I have to reach the high bar that I set for myself without fail and constantly wondering if I'm falling behind everyone else, among multiple other things, is something that I want to express and talk about in some way, for lack of a better term. Hyunjung doesn't particularly see herself as studious, as she does grapple with a lot of self-doubt, but her drive to be a good leader and her persistence in challenging herself to be better than she was the day before is a huge part of who she is. And she is always eager to prove that she's capable of carrying out whatever task she's assigned. And a large part of her character arc as of right now has to do with those borderline destructive self-standards and their effects, as well as her working on the tendencies that are holding her back and eating away at her self-confidence and potential. I think that ultimately she would realize, with additional help from the team, that she doesn't have to get it right 100% of the time, and that it's fine if you slip up every now and then. There is a lot of my own experience in Hyunjung's character arc, and I think the aforementioned topic, that you don't have to beat yourself up if you fall short of your own expectations, is something I know I would have appreciated and would still appreciate hearing, and hopefully other people might appreciate it as well. Now, as with the others, let's talk about Hyunjung's design. Hyunjung is more of an outlier in the fact that, in the old version, she had two signature colors, white and black. While it's interesting on paper and it's fitting for her old element, balance, it doesn't make up for the fact that her outfit compared to the rest of her teammates was objectively mid. She wore a two-tone black and white dress under a black hooded coat, thigh-length stockings, and black and white boots, and that was really it. On its own, it's not so bad, but when you put her next to Elea and Celestina and Teresa, for instance, Hyunjung felt more like a side character and not a part of the main group. In fact, if memory serves me right, I actually started to lose steam by the time I got to designing her after having designed the rest of the cast. So I just slapped on some articles of clothing that I thought would make her design look at least somewhat cohesive, and it shows. Hyunjung's old design is actually one of my least favorites because it's so comparatively low effort, so going into the redesign I wanted to shake things up completely. She deserves better, let's be real here. If you put the old Hyunjung with the new one side by side, they would look like completely separate characters, and given my feelings for her old design, I'm very happy with that. Her old signature colors and her old element weren't what I wanted for her going into the redesigns, since that wasn't what I wanted for her anymore. So I had to think about a color and an element that I thought would suit her better. In the end, I made her new signature color light brown, and I made her new element earth, which actually works out since no one in the old version had that signature color or element. As with the other characters, I wanted to give Hyunjung an outfit that would set her apart from the others and make her design more distinct. With her element being earth, that got me thinking of something very loosely based on construction work, mining, things like that. Without fully going into that angle, of course. I gave her a sleeveless shirt under a short jacket with a fur collar for the aesthetic, and also because I feel like it's definitely something she would wear. Trousers and gloves and boots that would be thicker to give her some extra protection. I also gave her a completely new hairstyle, that being a low ponytail with a long strand of hair pinned at the back. And I gave her some orange hair clips as well. Hyunjung's original weapon was called Kasukanaemi, which according to Google Translate means a faint smile. Not sure what that had to do with the element of balance, but okay. I guess. I had it written down as a flail-type weapon, but to be honest, this doesn't really look like a flail. I guess the best way to describe it would be two small dagger-like weapons connected by a cord, and it would allow Hyunjung to perform both ranged and melee attacks. In the remake, Hyunjung's new weapon is a warhammer that's almost as tall as she is. Given that Kaisa's original weapon was a hammer, you could definitely argue that I had these two switch weapons for the remake. For Hyunjung's hammer, I made it a dark brownish gray with silver and orange accents, and I also gave it a separate handle apart from the hammer's main body for ease of transportation, and also so she has something to hold on to when she's not swinging it around. The working end of the hammer flares out towards the end, while the other side is curved. The curved end is ornamental as of right now, but I'm not yet sure what purpose it would serve if I choose to make it functional. Lastly, let's talk about Hyunjung's magical capabilities. She can do multiple things related to the manipulation of the earth, like splitting the ground open with her hammer, or with her fists if she's so inclined, or causing things like landslides and miniature tremors. She can also move rocks, send them flying like projectiles, and mold giant boulders into any shape she wants. Kinda like a sculpture. Another cool defensive maneuver I've been thinking of that she can use in combat is that she could use her resonance to literally root herself to the ground, and protect herself against any offensive attacks. But a potential drawback that could come with that is that that move would have limited durability, so to speak, and eat at Hyunjung's resonance reserves with each attack she successfully defends herself against, which would force her hand at some point. And because she can split the ground open and use her magic to fortify herself, I think that she would be able to amplify the strength of her attacks. But I also think that doing something like this would make her attacks slower because that would mean more proverbial weight she'd have to carry. For example, if her hammer weighs about 15 pounds and if she were to channel her energy into it, then that would effectively make it 5 times heavier. While she'd also get a boost of super strength with this, it would also drain her energy reserves faster. It might not be directly related to Earth, but because the element of Earth might invoke sturdiness and strength, it's certainly a fun thing to think of, and a fun thing to put into her arsenal of magical abilities. All of that aside though, that's the last of these redesigns done, so let's see all of the redesigns I've done for this video, and then I'll put all 8 of the main characters side by side. To be honest, redesigning these characters was a major nostalgia trip. For years I'd been content with just leaving this story on the back burner, but all of these characters were at the forefront of my mind for a long time, and I wanted to give them the glow-ups that they all deserved. Also, as naive and oblivious as she was, I'm pretty confident that 14-year-old me sucks would have been knocked off if she saw these redesigns. I do want to tackle the story's villains at some point, but it might be a hot minute because videos like this take more time than usual to plan out. And this video is currently in first place for the longest word count. And that's not taking into account the IRL priorities that got in the way while I was making this video. But regardless, if you like this video and you want to see more from me, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and tune in every other Friday for art-related videos and other quality shenanigans. If you want to support me further, please check out my other social media accounts as well as my Ko-fi and my Etsy shop, which are all in the description. And lastly, as with the first video in the series, if you made it this far, leave a cloud emoji in the comment section below. And remember to keep things civil in the comments, or I will put a whoopee cushion in your chair when you least expect it. And yeah, that's about everything. Thanks for watching.